Every Magic player knows this feeling. You pick out a deck, roll for first, shuffle, cut the deck, draw your opening 7, and immediately realize you're in trouble. 0 lands! All spells but no action. So you sigh and then invoke the most powerful words in Magic. I'm going to mulligan. The great savior, shuffling away your terrible opening hand in the hopes of drawing something better. But here's the weird part. That word hasn't always meant the same thing. Sure, it's always been a term borrowed from golf that means you get to exchange a bad opening hand, but the particulars have changed a lot. Over the last 30 years, Magic has completely reinvented the mulligan rule. Not once, but multiple times. Every new version altered how decks were built, how tournaments were played, and which strategies were considered viable. They fundamentally changed the way that Magic was played. So how did we go from hope your opening hand works to today's mulligan rules? Well, it went something like this. In 1993, when Magic first released, the game did not have a mulligan. The original designers considered giving players the ability to trade out their hands, but opted against it. The logic behind this was, the more lenient opening hands were, the more the game would reward poor deck building. This makes sense if you look at the extreme case. Let's say that you have a deck. It is incredibly inconsistent, but it has the potential to win the game on turn 1 with a combo. This should be a high-risk, high-reward playstyle. If you have the ability to mulligan infinite times, though, you can just keep trading out your hand for hours until you assemble the pieces for that turn 1 combo. So yeah, obviously this can't happen. But there are degrees to this. Without any ability to mulligan, the game is incredibly susceptible to variance. You can build the most consistent deck in the world, but eventually, a hand of 7 spells will happen, and it'll render your deck building moot. Variance is still a stiff barrier to entry for new players, even with mulligans. Even worse when you have no control. But this isn't exclusive to newbies. In tournament play, 0 mulligans makes for soul-crushing inevitability. If players are met with predetermined losses from the get-go, games are depressing regardless of how responsible their deck building is. This makes for a horrible spectator experience. It's tough to put on a performance about an intense back-and-forth match when round 2 was a loss from the start. So the no-mulligan era was harmful to both the casual and competitive audiences. Some of you will still be unconvinced. After all, Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't need a mulligan, so why does Magic? There are a few differences between the two that make this logic flimsy. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a 40-card deck where Magic has 60. This means you need fewer cards to construct a deck, which increases every deck's consistency. Some will point out that Yu-Gi-Oh! Only lets you have 3 max copies of a card instead of 4, but doing the math, this still means you can run a minimum of 13.3 different cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you have to run at least 15 in Magic. Not a massive difference, but still a difference, and this is only assuming you're running the max number of copies of each card. Almost no decks ever run entire playsets of every card, so the deck size matters more than the math would have you believe. Magic also has lands, cards that, by design, often do nothing to progress your game plan on their own. Most act solely as a resource to spend on other cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have this. Most of its cards have essentially free casting costs. It's hard to end up with a hand of nothing to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Without serious issues in deck building. Of course, you can still have bad hands, but being entirely unplayable is a different story. On the other hand, you can have the best, most consistent Magic deck in the world, and still draw an opener that doesn't do anything. And when Yu-Gi-Oh! Players do have bad opening hands, they just have to concede to the poor variance. There's an argument that maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Could benefit from a mulligan. That's not an argument I would make, but I think that maybe assuming Yu-Gi-Oh! Just has it right might be a fallacy. But we're getting off track. All this is to say, Magic had a huge problem with variance, one that was severely impacting player enjoyment of the game. This ended up with many groups adopting homebrew mulligan rules. Taking note of this, the DCI decided to hop into action. The next year, the first version of the mulligan rule was officially implemented, the all land, no land. It worked like this. You take your opening 7 cards. Then, if you notice your hand is either entirely comprised of lands, or lacks even a single land, you can opt into a mulligan. To do this, first reveal your hand to your opponent in order to prove you meet the requirement. Then, shuffle those cards into your deck and draw a new 7. You could only do this once per game. So it seems obvious that someone was only considering the nightmare case scenarios here. If the issue is being entirely flooded or entirely screwed, let's just hedge against those. Although, yes, this did increase consistency, it was a little underwhelming, for a couple reasons. First, the all land no land lacked agency. You did not get to decide when to mulligan. What the deck stuck you with had the first say, and you only got to control the situation contingently. Second, it just didn't do its job often enough. There are many unplayable hands that you can draw that don't get caught by this criteria. 1 land in hand is often just as bad as 0, same with 6 lands and 7. And then finally, the all or nothing caused issues with information. Okay, so you're sitting down for your first game in a match. You get a hand of 7 spells, but no worries, the mulligan rules have you covered. You can grab a new set after, showing off your hand, which will reveal the deck that you are playing, and a lot of the strategy's most important cards. Now your opponent has a ton of information to use against you, and you have none on them. This is a bit too punishing when you're already on the receiving end of bad luck. This mulligan was a step in the right direction, but was also a flawed half measure. The game could benefit more from a bigger push. Fast forward to 1997. The competitive scene is taking off for Magic, and there's an upcoming Sealed Deck Pro Tour in Los Angeles. At this time, R&D decides to reveal the new plan going forward, the Paris Mulligan. It works like this. If a player didn't like their opening hand for any reason, they could, without revealing it, shuffle it back into their library. Then, they would draw a new hand, but this time with 1 fewer card. They can choose to continue this until they're satisfied with their hand, or run out of cards. This was a massive change to the mulligan rule, and it fixed many of the issues people had with the previous iteration. It gave players so much more agency than the all or nothing did. You were not at your deck's mercy in any way. There was no requirement to be able to mulligan in the first place, and you got to roll the dice multiple times if your deck insisted on being stubborn. This was a huge step towards reliability and consistency. Also, it patched the hole that was created with revealing information. The Paris Mulligan didn't need a condition to be met in order to go for it, so you never had to prove anything to your opponent. This means no information about your deck was revealed before the game started. There was also a real downside associated with the Paris Mulligan. Although the all or nothing is certainly less powerful as a set of rules, it's also something you'll do every time. There is no opportunity cost to doing the all or nothing. You have the worst hand possible, so you ship it and get a new one. No thought, just mulligan. The Paris Mulligan makes you go down a card, which is a significant drawback. Players can no longer just fire it off without thinking. Is it better to keep a hand with the max number of cards in it that you know is bad? Or to potentially get one that's even worse and has fewer resources to show for it? The Paris Mulligan gave players more agency, less variance, and gave Magic more nuance as a competitive game. It's no surprise then that this stuck around the longest of any mulligan rule. It was in place for nearly 20 years without changing, and when it finally did, it was still the template for all the mulligan rules to come. Next up, we have the Vancouver Mulligan. This was the next set of rules implemented in 2015 during the Battle for Zendikar pre-release. If the Paris Mulligan was a massive leap in the right direction, then the Vancouver was more like a little hop. Still important, still made progress, but less impactful than its radical predecessor. It was almost exactly the same as the Paris Mulligan, but with a slight tweak. If you had opted into 1 or more mulligans this game, you then got to look at the top card of your library and either keep it on top or tuck it onto the bottom. In the modern day, this is known as scrying. This change increased consistency for any players who were already behind, having lost access to some of their cards. You see, even though the Paris rules really helped out the unlucky players, people still felt that losing an entire card every time they mulliganed was a bit too harsh. Now, you got to see what was coming up. If it contributed to either being mana flooded or mana screwed, you could tuck it away. And if not, then great, you knew what to play in your hand around before starting. It wasn't the big splashy change the Paris was, but after some discourse, people tended to accept it with relative positivity. Which brings us to where we are now. In 2019, the London Mulligan was made the official rule for Magic the Gathering. Like the Vancouver before it, the London sought to achieve a more consistent game feel that gave players more control over what their starting hand looked like. Instead of taking fewer and fewer cards each time you mulligan, now you just take a whole nother 7 every time. But the catch is, once you finally stop mulliganing, you have to take a number of cards from your hand equal to the number of times you mulliganed and put them on the bottom of your deck. So this provided even more information. If you went down to 4 cards with the Vancouver Mulligan, you got to see 5 of them because of the scry at the end. If you went down to 4 cards with the London Mulligan, you still got to see an entire 7, and then decide which 3 you were least happy with. Additionally, this disproportionately made finding specific cards easier. This is important for sideboarding. If you're in a match against a graveyard deck, and really need to find a piece of graveyard hate, getting to look through 7 cards every time will drastically increase your odds of running into one of the 2 cards you brought in from your sideboard compared to looking at a diminishing number. Extrapolate this out to every silver bullet you play against every deck type, and it's no wonder that the London Mulligan makes sideboarding feel so much better. Since these changes were implemented, the London Mulligan has remained the accepted standard practice for the game. Almost every format uses it, and if this ends up changing one day, I have a hard time imagining it will be drastic. The Mulligan seems to be in line with the goals of the game and does a great job hedging against what many see as Magic's failures. So I think we see a few trends here. Firstly, Mulligans tend to be moving towards higher consistency. Magic is at its worst when you're sitting there wondering if lands are a bigger detriment to the game than a boon. It's a direct and sobering comparison to the game's competition, as none of the other major card games have lands. The more variance is allowed to take control of a game, the more likely the presence or absence of lands causes meaningful decision-making to cease, and the more Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Seem like better alternatives. Also, the Mulligans continuously move towards giving players agency. With every version, players have more control over what they're seeing and what they're throwing away. I doubt these trends will ever move the opposite direction. Players want to have access to powerful early turns, and the game feel starts to turn towards hopelessness when this isn't the case. Predetermination does not suit humans well. We want the ability to climb back from a bad start with clever tactics and perseverance. The Mulligan rules have changed to pursue that idea, so use them. Don't be afraid of the opportunity cost. Risk mitigation is fine, but risk aversion will harm you in the long run. Take full advantage of the Mulligan. After all, it was made for you.